He didn't wait a day. He didn't wait an hour. He walked into her hospital room 15 minutes after she gave birth to twins, and he wasn't carrying flowers. Carol Hutchins was still bleeding from surgery, her hands shaking as she held both babies against her chest, when her husband set a thick envelope on her tray and said 5 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You're not my problem anymore." He had no idea that 3 hours earlier, in a quiet room down the same hallway, Carol had signed something of her own, a contract that would value her work at $1 billion. And buried inside the prenup he laughed at and never bothered to read was a single clause that was about to turn his entire life into the cautionary tale his friends would whisper about for years. Dennis Hutchins didn't smile when he walked in. He didn't touch his children. He looked straight at his wife and said in a voice flat enough to chill the room, "You've been dead weight for years, Carol." And the nurse froze near the monitor. Carol blinked, trying to focus through the haze of anesthesia and exhaustion, trying to understand words that didn't fit the moment they'd been spoken into. Her voice came out small. "Dennis, I just had your babies." He scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Don't start crying," he snapped. "You're a liability. You should be grateful anyone married you at all." Behind him, his mother, Patricia, stood in the doorway with her arms folded, watching Carol and the way someone watches a stain they're deciding whether to bother cleaning. "She planned this pregnancy to trap you," Patricia said, loud enough for the nurse to hear. "Go live like the woman you were before my son saved you." And beside Dennis stood Vanessa, the woman who had no business being in that room at all, watching with a faint, satisfied smile. "For success, darling," Vanessa said softly. "Something you clearly don't understand." Carol Ann's arms tightened around the 2 small bodies pressed against her chest. On the tray beside her, the envelope weighted thick and final. What Dennis didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just hours earlier, in a quiet consultation room down the hall, Carol had signed a different set of papers entirely. A licensing deal that valued her work at $1 billion. And folded into the prenup Dennis had laughed at and never truly read was a clause that was about to turn this moment into the worst mistake of his life. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Carol Hutchins was 33 years old, 8 months pregnant with twins, and standing in her own kitchen like a woman waiting for permission to exist. The tension arrived the moment she walked in, sharp enough to cut through the morning quiet. "Look at you," Patricia Hutchins said, her voice slicing across the room. "You've really let yourself go." Patricia was Dennis's mother, 62, immaculate, and accustomed to being obeyed without question. She believed family was a hierarchy, not a partnership, and from the very first day Carol married her son, Patricia had made her position clear. Carol was tolerated. She was never accepted. Carol's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, round and heavy beneath her dress. The twins shifted inside her, slow and uneasy, as though they could feel the temperature of the room change. "Twins aren't an excuse," Patricia continued flatly. "A woman should still know how to carry herself." Carol said nothing. A few feet away, Dennis Hutchins sat at the breakfast bar, 37, ambitious, and obsessed with how things appeared rather than how they actually were. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on his phone, thumbs moving fast through emails, jaw tight with an irritation he no longer bothered to hide. He didn't look up. That silence hurt more than the insult had. Dennis liked to tell people he had saved Carol, and that she had been unremarkable before him, that marriage had given her value she hadn't possessed on her own. He said it at dinners. He said it at work functions. He said it often enough that it had become the story he told himself about who he was. Carol swallowed the words rising in her throat and reminded herself, as she always did, that this was temporary. That pregnancy made people harsh. That marriage required patience. That seasons changed, even the cold ones. "Can you stop standing like that?" Dennis said suddenly, not looking up. "You're blocking the light." Carol turned slightly confused. She started. "Don't," he cut her off. "You're always so emotional. It's exhausting." Patricia nodded approvingly, like a teacher pleased with a student's correct answer. Something sank quietly in Carolyn's chest. Not pain exactly, but a familiar weight she had learned to carry without flinching. She turned toward the counter and busied her hands with nothing in particular, searching for something to wipe, something to fix, something to make herself useful inside a home she had helped build but had never truly been allowed to claim. As she moved, her mind slipped backward into memory, pulled toward a version of herself that felt almost like a stranger now. Years earlier, Carol had been someone else entirely. At 27, she had worked as a senior data strategist at a logistics research firm, the kind of employee who stayed late not because she had to, but because she was the only one who understood the problems no one else could solve. She didn't talk much about her work. She didn't need praise. Results spoke for themselves, and she preferred it that way. That was where she met Dennis. He had been charming back then, curious about her work in a way that felt rare. He asked questions. He told her she was brilliant, that she deserved more than being invisible inside someone else's company. She believed him the way people believe things they desperately want to be true. What Dennis never told anyone, what he had since erased from his own version of events, was that Carol hadn't lost her career. She had walked away from it on her own terms. 3 months after their engagement, Patricia had invited Carol into lunch. The restaurant had been quiet, elegant, and uncomfortable in a way Carol couldn't quite name at the time. "You work too much," Patricia had said calmly, stirring her tea without looking up. A wife who works forgets how to support her husband. Carol had hesitated. "I enjoy my work," she'd answered carefully. Patricia had smiled, thin and practiced. "Enjoyment is for hobbies," she'd said. "Marriage is about priorities." That same night, Carol had called a lawyer for the first time in her life. Her name was Renata Cole. Renata had helped her negotiate her exit from the firm and had quietly, firmly advised her to protect the algorithm she'd spent 2 years building. "You have something valuable," Renata had told her. "Don't give it away just because someone says it's just work." Carol had registered her intellectual property under her own name before she resigned, and she never mentioned that detail to Patricia. In the months before the wedding, after the engagement, but before a date was set, Carol met with Renata again, and that was when the prenup came up. It had been Carolyn's idea, not Dennis's. Renata drafted it carefully, clearly, and both of them signed it long before the ceremony. Anything Carol created before or during the marriage remained hers. No spousal claim, no shared ownership of her intellectual property, and one additional clause Carol had insisted on herself. Financial penalties and legal recourse in the event of coercion, financial control, or abuse. Dennis had laughed when he saw it, skimmed it without real attention, and signed it anyway, certain he would always be the one holding the power in the relationship. Back in the present, Carol wiped the counter slowly, aware of Dennis's eyes flicking toward her now, assessing rather than affectionate. "You know," he said, finally looking at her, "my colleagues keep asking why you never come to events anymore. It's embarrassing." Carol turned to face him. "I'm 8 months pregnant," she said softly. "With twins." Dennis sighed, the sound theatrical and impatient. "Excuses," he muttered. "Other women manage," Patricia added with a small, satisfied smirk. Carol said nothing. She had learned that silence kept the peace, or at least delayed the inevitable explosion. No one in that kitchen noticed how carefully she had learned to live alongside them, quiet and watchful. In the small office upstairs, she kept a separate laptop, always locked, always charged, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because experience had taught her that some things needed to stay out of reach. She still consulted occasionally on logistics problems for former industry contacts, all of it legal, all of it routed through a personal company registered in her own name years earlier. No overlap with Dennis's finances. No joint signatures. She signed documents digitally through secure channels her lawyer had set up for exactly this reason. Dennis had once asked who kept calling her at odd hours. Carol had smiled and said, "Old work things." He never pressed further. Now, standing alone at the counter, she felt another small movement inside her and placed both hands gently on her belly, closing her eyes for just a moment. The room around her faded. The insults, the tension, the practiced cruelty dimming into background noise. She leaned forward slightly and whispered, almost too quiet to hear, "Mama will fix this. I promise." Dennis scoffed behind her, already back on his phone. Patricia turned away, uninterested in a conversation that didn't involve her. On the table, half hidden beneath a folded magazine, Carolyn's phone lit up with a single notification from a secure email account her lawyer had set up months earlier. She didn't reach for it yet. She finished wiping the counter, set the cloth aside, and forced herself to breathe evenly. Because somewhere beneath the silence in that kitchen, something irreversible had already begun, and very soon, everything Dennis and his mother believed they understood about her was going to collapse. The pain arrived suddenly, sharp and unforgiving. Carol and Hutchins gripped the edge of the hospital bed as another contraction rolled through her body, stronger than the one before it. Her breath caught hard in her throat. The room felt too quiet, too sterile, too empty for what her body was doing. She was alone. Dennis had dropped her off an hour earlier after her obstetrician suggested she stay for monitoring, and he had stood at the foot of the bed for less than 5 minutes, checking his watch twice before kissing her forehead, like an obligation he was eager to complete. "Text me if it gets serious," he'd said. "I have meetings this afternoon. I'll come back when it's time." Patricia had promised to check in later. Neither of them had returned. Now Carol sat under dim lighting in a private consultation room, just off the maternity ward, her heart racing, her hands trembling not only from pain, but from the weight of everything pressing down on her at once. Then her phone vibrated against the tray table. She flinched, half expecting it to be Dennis, already annoyed, already distant. But the name on the screen stopped her breath completely. Renata Cole. Carol straightened slowly, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Renata was more than just the lawyer who had drafted her prenup years earlier. She had been there the night Carol walked away from her old firm, the one who had helped her protect the code she'd written when no one else believed it carried any real value. Renata wasn't family. She wasn't sentimental. She never called unless something mattered. Carol answered. "Yes," she whispered. Renata's voice came through steady, professional, controlled, with a faint sound of paper rustling somewhere in the background. "It's done," Renata said. Carol's fingers tightened around the phone. "The licensing agreement is fully executed," Renata continued. "Global rollout approved. Final valuation confirmed by the board this morning." Carol had signed her portion of the agreement in that very consultation room earlier that morning, her hand trembling slightly as she scrolled her signature across the tablet Renata's office had sent ahead of time. The company on the other end, a multinational logistics firm that had approached Carol, and after seeing what her algorithm could do during a small pilot program, had spent nearly a year negotiating terms with her quietly, carefully, away from anyone in her personal life. "You crossed 1 billion, Renata said. The number barely registered at first. Another contraction rolled through Carol hard enough that the word billion blurred in a background noise entirely. Survival felt more real than any number in that moment. "That's their internal valuation of the technology," Renata went on. "The first milestone payment is locked. Congratulations, and more importantly, you're officially protected." Carol closed her eyes, not from joy exactly, but because for the first time in years, she felt something loosen inside her chest. Not the safety of money, not the safety of status. Legal safety, the kind that couldn't be taken from her in a hallway or a kitchen or a courtroom. Another contraction hit, and she breathed through it slowly, grounding herself as Renata kept speaking. "Legal counsel signed off 20 minutes ago," Renata said. "Your company retains full ownership of the code. They only license it. No matter what happens in your marriage, this deal is untouchable. It's in your name alone, consistent with the prenup." Carol nodded, even though Renata couldn't see her through the phone. "Thank you," she said quietly. Carol Renata added, her tone shifting just slightly, softer but still precise. "I saw your missed call from last night. If something is happening at home, document everything. You already know this, but I'm reminding you. The abuse clause in your prenup is enforceable. Don't let them pressure you into signing anything in your current condition." Carol Ann's throat tightened around words she didn't trust herself to say evenly. "Understand." She managed. She ended the call just as the pain faded into a dull, lingering ache, and the room went quiet again, leaving space for memory to surface uninvited. Years earlier, long before pregnancy, long before cruelty became something she expected daily, Carol Ann had stayed late in an empty office, staring at lines of code most of her colleagues didn't fully understand. She had noticed inefficiencies buried inside logistics systems, patterns costing companies millions every year that no one else had bothered to question. So she built something better, a proprietary algorithm, adaptive and clean, quietly powerful in ways its simplicity disguised. At first, it had been nothing more than a side project, something to occupy the hours when the office emptied out around her. Then it became something else entirely. When the firm began collapsing under leadership that valued image over substance, Carol Ann made a decision. She reclaimed what was hers, legally and completely. Her work, her idea, her creation. She registered it under her own name, protected it carefully, and refined it slowly as the rest of her life moved forward around her. She never told Dennis the full scope of what she'd built, not because she was hiding something wrong, but because she had been warned gently and repeatedly by women who knew better. Men get threatened by women with options. Patricia had told her once, years earlier, over tea that tasted faintly of warning. If you want peace, don't make him feel small. Carol Ann had listened. She had always listened. The prenup had been her idea from the start, and Renata had insisted on specific, unambiguous language. Anything Carol Ann created before or during the marriage remained hers. Any attempt by a spouse to transfer, conceal, or control her intellectual property triggered automatic financial penalties and immediate grounds to seek separate accounts and protection. Dennis had shrugged when he read it, convinced he would always hold the power regardless of what any document said. Now, sitting in a hospital room with her body preparing to bring 2 lives into the world, Carol Ann placed a hand against her stomach and breathed through another wave of discomfort. The twins shifted inside her, restless. "I won't let them inherit silence," she whispered, barely audible even to herself. The door opened briefly. A nurse glanced in, checked the monitor, offered a small, reassuring smile, and stepped back out. Carol Ann was alone again. Her phone buzzed once more, this time with a message notification, not from Dennis, not from anyone in his family. A secure confirmation email, unread. She didn't open it. She didn't need to yet. Another contraction surged through her, stronger and more urgent than the last, and she pressed the call button for assistance. Her breathing stayed steady, even as her face tightened with effort. The nurse returned quickly with the obstetrician, who explained gently that labor was progressing faster than expected, that the operating room was being prepped as a precaution. Somewhere else in the building, Dennis remained unaware, still scrolling, still confident, still believing he held every advantage in a life that was already shifting beneath him. Carol Ann lay back against the pillow, eyes fixed on the ceiling as a nurse adjusted her foreline. "It's time," the nurse said softly. Carol Ann nodded. As she was wheeled down the hallway, her phone slipped slightly against the bed beside her, the screen lighting up one final time before going dark. The subject line glowed for just a moment. Confirmation, final licensing agreement, executed. Dennis never saw it, and in just a few minutes, he would make a decision that would unravel everything he believed he controlled. He simply didn't know it yet. It had been barely 15 minutes since the twins were born when the room changed completely. The first cries had only just faded when the door opened hard. Carol and Hutchins lay on the hospital bed, drenched in sweat, her body still trembling from exhaustion and pain. Her arms shook as she held her newborn twins against her chest, one wrapped in a pale blanket, the other tucked close beneath her chin, their faces red and small, mouths searching blindly for comfort. She was stitched, sore, and utterly drained, but for one fragile moment, she had been smiling. Nothing else had existed. Then the door swung open without warning. Dennis Hutchins walked in first. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He didn't move toward the babies at all. He looked annoyed, the way a man looks when he's been inconvenienced rather than blessed. Behind him stepped Vanessa Cole, a woman Carol had seen only once before, briefly, at a company dinner months earlier, introduced then as a consultant. Vanessa was polished, confident, dressed far too well for a maternity floor, her expression calm and possessive in a way that made Carol's stomach turn. She stood exactly where a wife should have stood. A second later, Patricia Hutchins entered behind them, chin lifted, lips pressed into a thin, satisfied line. Her eyes went straight to the baby's first, cold and appraising, before flicking back up to scan the room, assessing who might be watching. A nurse near the monitor froze as the energy in the room shifted instantly. Carol tightened her arms around the twins on instinct. "Dennis," she whispered, her voice thin and confused. "What's she doing here?" Dennis ignored the question entirely. He stepped closer to the bed and set a thick manila envelope down on the rolling tray beside her arm, the sound of it landing against metal louder than it should have been. "You're not my problem anymore," he said flatly. "You've been dead weight for years." The words didn't make sense to her at first, her mind slow and foggy from medication and shock. She stared at him, then down at the envelope, then back at his face, searching for some version of this that made sense. "I just gave birth," she said quietly. "They're still." Vanessa leaned in slightly, her voice soft, almost gentle, almost rehearsed. "For success, darling," she said. "Something you wouldn't understand." Carol's breath caught in her throat. Patricia scoffed from the foot of the bed. "She planned this pregnancy to trap you," Patricia said, loud enough that the nurse visibly flinched. "Disgusting." Carol shook her head weakly. "That's not Dennis, please." She tried to sit up, panic cutting through the exhaustion, and the movement sent pain ripping through her abdomen hard enough to make her gasp. The nurse stepped forward instinctively. "Sir, she just came out of surgery," the nurse said carefully. "She needs rest." "This isn't." Patricia turned her head slowly and stared the nurse down. "This is a private family matter," she said. "You're not needed right now." The nurse hesitated, glancing at Carol, who managed only a small shake of her head, not because she didn't want the help, but because she understood exactly what confrontation with Patricia would look like, and she didn't want that in front of her children. "Not here." The nurse lingered near the door anyway, unwilling to leave entirely. Dennis didn't help Carol sit up. He didn't ask how she felt. "Don't embarrass me," he snapped. "I need you to sign these so we can both move on." He tapped the envelope twice. Carol stared at it. "Divorce papers," Dennis said, as casually as announcing a delivery. "My lawyer already filed. This is just your acknowledgement." Carol looked down at her children, warm and real and alive against her chest, then back up at him. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why here?" Dennis exhaled sharply, irritated by the question itself. "You've always been a burden," he said. "Always emotional, always in the way. I'm done carrying you." Vanessa nodded, satisfied. "You should be grateful," she added. Not every woman gets clarity this early. Something cracked inside Carol, and then, quietly, completely. She had given him years. She had given up the version of her career that involved being seen. She had just given birth to his children. And this was the ending he had chosen. Her arms tightened protectively around the twins again. Patricia clicked her tongue sharply. "Stop clinging," she said. "You're making a scene." Carol didn't answer. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply stared at the envelope, then at the blank signature line visible through the translucent flap. Dennis shifted his weight impatiently. "Sign it," he repeated, "or this gets uglier. Lawyers, depositions. You're not built for that." Carol's phone buzzed once on the bed beside her elbow, the sound cutting sharply through the tension. She flinched. Dennis reacted instantly, reaching over and knocking the phone aside without even glancing at it. It slid across the sheet and stopped near the edge of the mattress, the screen lighting briefly before dimming again. No one saw the subject line. "Confirmation, final licensing agreement, executed." Carol didn't reach for it. She looked at Dennis instead. "I'm not signing anything right now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but steadier than before. "I just had surgery. My lawyer will review it." Dennis's eyes flashed with something close to disbelief. "You don't have a lawyer," he said. "You have me. Or you did." Carol and held his gaze steadily. "I do," she said quietly. "I've had one for years." For the first time since walking into the room, Dennis hesitated. The nurse shifted her weight and stepped closer to the bed again. "I'm documenting this conversation," she said carefully. "It's hospital policy when legal documents are brought into a post-operative room." Patricia turned on her sharply. "You people and your policies." Dennis cut her off with a small, tight gesture, feeling control slipping through his fingers in a way he didn't understand yet. He grabbed the envelope, shoved it back into his briefcase, and snapped it shut. "This isn't over," he said. He turned and walked out. Vanessa followed, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Patricia lingered a moment longer, eyes cold and unreadable. "You brought this on yourself," she said. Then she left too. The door closed behind them, and Carol was alone again, holding 2 newborn lives against her chest, pain pulsing steadily through her body. The nurse moved quickly now, adjusting blankets, checking the 4, her professionalism returning in full. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "Do you want me to note everything that just happened?" Carol nodded once, unable to trust her own voice just yet. The nurse tapped the notes into her tablet carefully. Outside the room, voices faded into the hallway. Inside, something else had quietly awakened. Carol lowered her forehead gently to the twins' heads and closed her eyes. Very soon, everything Dennis believed he had just ended would only be beginning. The card reader beeped once, then again, then a third time, sharper, louder, final. Declined. 3 days after giving birth, Carol and Hutchins stood at the hospital pharmacy counter, her body still sore, one twin in her arms and the other settled in a carrier at her feet. The discharge nurse had handed her a short list of medications to fill before leaving, nothing complicated, nothing that should have been a problem. The clerk behind the counter shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking toward the babies before returning to the screen. "I'm sorry," the clerk said softly. "It says the account is closed." Heat rushed to Carol Ann's face. "That can't be right," she said, her voice calm but thin around the edges. "We've used that card for years. Please try again." The clerk tried, and the result didn't change. Through the glass doors behind her, Dennis's car idled in the patient pickup lane. He sat in the driver's seat with sunglasses on, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel without urgency. In the passenger seat, Vanessa scrolled through her phone, her lips curved into a small, pleased smile. She'd insisted on coming along when Dennis picked Carol up, framing it as helpfulness. "It'll be easier," she'd said. "I can help carry things while you recover." Now she leaned slightly out the open window when she noticed Carol and turned back toward the counter. "She spends too much," Vanessa said, loud enough for several people nearby to hear. "She'll have to learn a budget." A few heads turned. Carol tightened her grip on the baby in her arms, feeling the familiar mix of shame and disbelief settle into her chest. She reached in her bag and pulled out an envelope of emergency cash she'd kept set aside for years. Money saved quietly from small consulting payments long before any billion-dollar deal had entered the picture. She paid the clerk without looking at anyone around her. Outside, before she reached the car, she started recording on her phone, the camera angled subtly down toward her feet, the audio clear and steady. "What happened?" Dennis asked as she eased into the back seat with a wince. "The card was declined," Carol said. "They said the account was closed." Dennis shrugged, shifting the car into gear. "I moved everything," he said. "Joint accounts are a liability in a divorce. My lawyer advised it." "You canceled our medical card while I was still admitted," Carol said softly. "You're covered under my insurance," he replied. "Stop being dramatic." Vanessa smirked from the front seat, eyes still on her phone. Carol said nothing more. She pressed her phone deeper into the diaper bag, letting it keep recording quietly. When they reached the house Dennis had bought 2 years into the marriage, the one he liked to call his, even though Carol Ann's name was on the deed alongside his, the tension returned immediately and without warning. 2 men stood at the gate, security from the private company that patrolled the neighborhood, both avoiding Carol Ann's eyes as the car pulled up. Dennis rolled down his window. "Afternoon," One guard said carefully. We received new access instructions. Carol frowned. What instructions? She asked. The guard swallowed before answering. Ma'am, he said, we've been told your name was removed from the primary access list. You're not authorized to enter the property without Mr. Hutchins present. Carol blinked slowly. I live here, she said. My children live here. Not for long, came a voice from the front steps. Patricia appeared in the doorway like a commander surveying a battlefield, her eyes going straight to the guards rather than to Carol. And, follow the instructions you were given, she said. Only Mr. Hutchins and approved guests are allowed through without clearance. Vanessa slipped past them all, keys to the front door already in her hand. Carol opened the car door carefully, pain flaring through her abdomen as she stepped out with the twin carrier balanced against her hip. Dennis, she said, I just had surgery. I need my things. The baby's things. Their cribs. Dennis avoided her eyes entirely. You'll have what you need, he said. We'll send essentials to wherever you're staying. This is simpler. I wasn't told I was staying anywhere else, Carolyn said. Patricia smiled thinly. You'll manage, she said. You managed before my son saved you. Inside, the house moved quickly without her. Drawers opening, closets emptying, suitcases dragged across floors she had chosen herself. Carol stood at the gate, the twins fussing softly while her life was sorted and packed without her input or consent. Dennis's younger brother, quiet and uncomfortable, stood near the walkway, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. His sister leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on her phone, pretending not to listen. No one defended Carol, and no one asked a single question. She shifted the weight of the carrier and pulled out her phone with her free hand, keeping the screen dark and low, the recording app still quietly running. Ma'am, do you have somewhere to go tonight? One of the guards asked quietly once Patricia had stepped back inside. Carol nodded, though she didn't yet. Yes, she said. I'll manage. She didn't tell him that somewhere would be a small furnished rental Renata had mentioned once, just in case. Vanessa reappeared in the doorway wearing Carolyn's robe, the one she wore every morning without exception. Vanessa smiled, turning slightly to admire herself in the reflection of the glass door. So this is where we'll live, she said casually. Dennis didn't correct her. Carol felt something detach quietly inside her chest. Not her heart exactly, but something colder. Something that watched now instead of feeling. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Renata, are you safe? Renata asked. No greeting, no small talk. Not here, Carolyn replied. Go to the address I texted you yesterday, Renata said. The short-term rental. I booked it in your name. We'll handle the house legally. Don't argue with them right now. Carol glanced toward the gate cameras, the guards, the open front door where her robe now hung on someone else's shoulders. I have the babies, she said. I know, Renata replied. That's exactly why I'm telling you not to stand in a driveway arguing with people who want you destabilized. Get somewhere stable. Then we move. Later that night, after settling the twins into borrowed bassinets inside the small rental Renata had arranged, Carol received a message that Patricia was hosting a small family gathering and expected her to attend to discuss terms like an adult. Renata's reply came quickly. Go, she wrote, and record everything. Carol arrived slowly, exhausted, carrying the twins carefully into a room that went quiet the moment she entered. Patricia glanced toward the chair beside Dennis at the long dining table. Remove that, she said sharply. A cousin hesitated, then picked it up and carried it away without a word. Carol stood near the doorway. She doesn't belong here, Patricia said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. She never did. A phone lifted somewhere across the room, screen angled toward Carol and recording openly. Dennis didn't look at her. Vanessa sat exactly where Carol should have been, one hand resting casually on Dennis's knee. Carol shifted her weight, pain flaring through her abdomen, but she didn't ask to sit. She didn't ask for anything at all. She watched instead. She noticed the way Vanessa flipped through financial documents with practiced confidence. She noticed Dennis's banking notifications lighting up his phone and the way he tilted the screen just enough for Vanessa to see clearly. She noticed everything carefully, quietly. No one spoke to her directly the entire evening. She was present but invisible. When the gathering ended, Carol and stood near the door preparing to leave. Vanessa walked past her and kissed Dennis slowly, deliberately, territorial in the living room that had once been Carol Ann's. Carol Ann didn't cry. She didn't react at all. She memorized the way Dennis leaned into it, the way Patricia watched with quiet approval, the way the security guard logged the exact time at the gate as she left again with her children. As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it yet, but she knew, without quite knowing how, that everything being taken from her was being documented somewhere else entirely. Quietly, and soon, the people who had tried to erase her were going to learn exactly what it meant to leave a trail. Because what they believed was the end was only evidence being born. The door closed behind Carol, and with a soft, deliberate click, and for a moment the sound felt louder than it should have. Final, controlled. She stood still for a few seconds, one hand resting on the handle, breathing through the ache that still lived in her body. Every movement reminded her of what she'd survived. Surgery, blood loss, sleepless nights stacked on top of each other. But her grip on the moment was steady. The twins slept in their carrier beside her, tiny chests rising and falling in quiet rhythm. This was the first real silence she'd known in days that wasn't filled with someone else's voice demanding something from her. Carol Ann stepped into the office. It was small and neutral, no personal touches anywhere, just a table, 3 chairs, and a wide window letting in soft afternoon light. The kind of room built for decisions made with facts instead of emotion. Renata Cole rose from her seat when Carol Ann entered. Mid-40s, dressed simply, eyes sharp and alert in the way that came from decades of paying close attention. She had represented Carol Ann for years now, first for her intellectual property, then for the prenup, and now, inevitably, for this. "You made it," Renata said. Carol Ann nodded and lowered herself carefully into the chair beside the twins, adjusting their blanket before looking up again. Renata didn't rush her. She laid out a thick folder and began spreading documents carefully across the table. Bank statements, legal notices, printed screenshots, security access logs. "They moved faster than I expected," Renata said. "But they also made more mistakes than I expected." Carol Ann leaned forward slightly. Renata pointed to the first page. "Financial control," she said. "Your cards were canceled while you were hospitalized, and your access to the marital home was removed without any court order. That's documented, time-stamped. It violates both standard marital rights and the abuse clause in your prenup." She slid another page forward. "Unauthorized transfers," Renata continued. "Marital funds moved to Vanessa Cole's personal account, labeled as consulting fees. No contract, no deliverables, no approval from you, despite your prenup requiring mutual consent for transfers of this size." Carol Ann nodded once, jaw tight but steady. Renata placed a third document on the table. "Coercion," she said. "Divorce papers brought into a postoperative room, witnessed by a nurse. The hospital already has an incident report on file." "They didn't hide it," Carol Ann said quietly. "They thought they didn't have to." Renata studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You were right to save everything." Carol Ann reached into her bag and placed her phone on the table, unlocking it and sliding it toward Renata. The screen filled with files, videos, photos, audio clips, security footage of the guard explaining she was no longer authorized to enter. A recording of Patricia insisting she never belonged there. Vanessa's comment at the pharmacy about learning to budget. Dennis admitting he'd moved everything out of the joint account. Renata scrolled through it all slowly, and Carol Ann watched without looking away. "They thought silence meant weakness," Carol Ann said. "It didn't." There was a knock at the door. A man stepped inside briefly, early 40s, plain clothes, alert eyes. "This is Marcus Reyes," Renata said, "private investigator. He's verified the digital evidence and pulled independent logs of his own." Marcus nodded toward Carol Ann. "We've cross-checked everything," he said. "Security records match your footage. Gate logs, transaction times, staff statements. It all lines up. And there's one more thing. Dennis and Vanessa set up a shell company 3 months ago. Hutchins Coal Analytics. No real product, just a name close enough to your field to raise eyebrows. Carol Ann's expression didn't change, though her eyes sharpened noticeably. They plan to present your algorithm as theirs if they could get access, Marcus said. The licensing company flagged the attempted contact already. They forwarded the emails. They already see Dennis and Vanessa as a liability, Renata added. That helps you significantly. Carol and met Marcus's gaze directly. Is it enough? She asked. He didn't hesitate. Yes. He stepped back out, closing the door quietly behind him. The room settled into stillness again. Carol Ann leaned back in her chair and finally let herself breathe fully for the first time in days. The twins stirred softly, then went still again, and she looked down at them with something softening in her eyes. This isn't about hurting him, she said. It's about ending it properly. Renata nodded. And making sure it can't be rewritten later, she added. Carol Ann lifted her head. They erased me, she said. I want the truth seen in full, where no one can argue with it. Renata gathered the documents into a neat stack. Dennis's petition for divorce is already filed, she said. We're filing a counter-petition and a motion for protective orders today. With everything we have, the court will see the pattern clearly. Financial abuse, coercion, attempted interference with your work. Carol Ann exhaled slowly. And the deal? She asked. Untouched, Renata confirmed. Legal has already sent a letter confirming the intellectual property is solely yours. Once this goes public, the narrative will follow the woman who built it, not the man who tried to profit off it. Carol Ann glanced back at the carrier. The twins slept on, unaware of contracts or courtrooms or betrayal. They won't grow up thinking this is normal, she said. Renata's voice softened. No, she said. They won't. A few days later, once everything had been organized into a clean, undeniable sequence, the first video began playing without sound. Carol Ann leaned forward instinctively, her body tense, eyes fixed on the laptop screen, while the twins slept beside her on the office floor in their carrier, tiny hands curled into fists. On the screen, a hospital pharmacy counter, a timestamp glowing in the corner. 3 days after delivery, 10:14 in the morning. That's the exact minute your primary joint account was shut down, Renata said. Carol Ann watched herself on the screen, pale and slow-moving, holding a newborn while a red decline flashed across the terminal. Another file opened. Bank records, clean and precise. Marital funds transferred out in 3 large amounts across the 48 hours surrounding delivery, the recipient name repeating each time. Vanessa Coal Consulting, labeled as consulting expenses. No contract, Renata said. No work product, no disclosure to you. That's not consulting. That's siphoning. Marcus adjusted the laptop angle and clicked to the next clip. This one pulled from the house's own security system. Cloud backup, he said. You were still living there when this was recorded. The footage showed the kitchen. Patricia stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, pouring dark, dirty mop water into a bucket, stirring slowly. Dennis stood beside her, visibly tense. She needs to learn respect, Patricia said in the recording. Take the clean bucket away and give her this. Do it before she thinks she still belongs here. A housekeeper stepped in a frame, looking uncomfortable. Ma'am, she's pregnant, the housekeeper said quietly. The doctor told her not to. Patricia cut her off sharply. Then she can sit and watch while we go through her things, she said. Either way, she'll understand this isn't her home. The clip ended. The room stayed silent for a long moment. This isn't just unkind, Renata said. This shows a pattern. Humiliation, control. You were pregnant with twins when this was recorded. The timestamp puts it at 6 months. Carol Ann stared at the blank screen, remembering every moment she had been told to endure quietly. Now silence was finally speaking for her. Marcus placed another file on the table. Former staff came forward once your counterpetition was filed, he said. They were afraid of losing their jobs before. Now they're not. These are their statements. He slid over written declarations, short and factual. One line stood out clearly. Mr. Hutchins instructed us not to acknowledge Mrs. Hutchins's presence in front of guests. He said it would confuse the hierarchy. Carol's throat tightened reading it. Renata opened one more folder carefully. "There's more," she said. "Photographs from fire inspectors with the security company that maintained the house's alarm system. Burnt paper fragments, charred edges, part of a sealed legal letter, destroyed in the kitchen trash 3 weeks before the birth. That letter," Renata continued, "was the original hard copy confirming your exclusive ownership of the algorithm and evaluation metrics used in the deal. It was couriered with delivery confirmation. It never reached you." The housekeeper reported a formal legal letter arriving that day, Marcus said. "She says Vanessa picked it up and said, 'This doesn't matter anymore,' and later saw burnt paper in the trash." The fire inspector confirmed the remains matched the courier's stationery. Carol inhaled slowly. Vanessa hadn't just humiliated her. She had tried to destroy proof of ownership before the deal had even finalized. Carol reached into her bag and placed a slim folder of her own on the table. "I kept digital backups," she said. The videos continued. A nurse's incident report. Dentist delivering divorce documents into a post-operative room. Patricia ordering the nurse to leave. Carol stating clearly she wouldn't sign without her lawyer present. Gate logs showing her access removed the same day. A text from Dennis to his own lawyer reading, "Get her out before she realizes what we moved." And then one more layer. "This is where it gets interesting," Marcus said, opening a final file. A series of emails surfaced on screen, Dennis and Vanessa using company letterhead to pitch Hutchins Coal Analytics to the same licensing firm as a streamlined logistics solution. Vague descriptions, no working prototype, but language that mirrored Carol's early pitch decks almost word for word. "They tried to set up a separate meeting," Marcus said. General counsel flagged it as a conflict and forwarded everything straight to Renata. Renata didn't hide her satisfaction. "They thought you were alone," she said. "You weren't." Carol watched it all with a strange, steady calm. She wasn't reliving the pain anymore. She was mapping it. "We've already turned this over to a forensic accountant," Marcus said. "The court will see the money trail. The regulators will see the attempted shell company. Your prenup's abuse provisions will hold." Carol glanced down at her children again, smoothing their blanket carefully. "They won't grow up thinking this is normal," she repeated. "No," Renata said again, softer this time. "They won't. We have enough," Marcus said simply, closing his laptop. "More than enough," Renata echoed. "From this point forward, we don't just defend. We set the record." Carol looked at her own reflection in the dark laptop screen. "This was supposed to be quiet," she said. "He wanted me to disappear." Renata met her gaze directly. "Do you want this to end quietly?" she asked. "Or do you want the truth on record where it can't be spun later?" Carol watched the twins breathe for a long moment, the rise and fall of their tiny chests steady and sure. Then she nodded. "We go public," she said. The courtroom door swung open with a sharp echo through the hallway. Weeks had passed since Carol left the house. Enough time for filings, responses, and arguments laid carefully on paper, but not enough time for Dennis to understand what he was walking into. He entered first, shoulders back, chin lifted like a man who still believed he owned the room. Tailored suit, expensive watch, polished shoes, the appearance of calm stretched thin over something underneath that hadn't quite settled. Vanessa sat beside him, legs crossed, nails perfect, lips curved into a controlled half-smile as she scanned the room like another meeting she expected to win easily. Behind them, Patricia took her seat, spine straight, eyes cold, and leaned toward Dennis to whisper without concern for who might hear. "She'll fold," Patricia said. "She always does." Dennis didn't respond. He didn't need to. He believed her completely. Then the room shifted. Carol entered last, unhurried, composed, wearing a simple dress with no jewelry meant to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to look powerful. She already was. The press noticed first, then the observers, a low murmur moving through the gallery as Carol took her seat beside Renata. Dennis glanced back once, his expression tightening. Carol didn't look at him at all. The judge, an older man with a steady voice and sharp, attentive eyes, called the court to order. Papers passed forward. Silence fell across the room as he adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document at the center of the case. The prenuptial agreement, line by line. Dennis's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the language proved clear, precise, and impossible to argue around. Clause 1. Renata remained composed throughout. Your Honor, she said, we're not asking the prenup to decide everything. We're asking the court to enforce what Dennis Hutchins voluntarily signed and to weigh his documented conduct in determining custody and financial awards. The judge continued reviewing the file in front of him for a long moment. The court finds clear evidence, he said at last, of financial abuse, coercion in a medical setting, and attempted interference with the protected party's lawful business interests. He looked directly at Dennis. The prenuptial agreement is valid and fully enforceable. He turned a page. The divorce is granted. Vanessa inhaled sharply beside him. Restitution is ordered, the judge continued. All funds improperly transferred to Ms. Cole under the guise of consulting fees are to be returned to the marital estate, then allocated according to the prenup. Mr. Hutchins will be responsible for Mrs. Hutchins's legal fees. Dennis's face drained of color. Regarding custody, the judge went on, the court is persuaded by the documented pattern of behavior toward Mrs. Hutchins during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum recovery, including deliberate attempts to destabilize her financially while she recovered from surgery. He looked toward Carolyn now. Primary physical and legal custody is awarded to Mrs. Hutchins. The silence shattered the moment she stood. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Cameras lifted at once. The room leaned forward, hungry and waiting. Dennis felt it before he understood it. Carolyn stepped away from the table slowly, her movements careful but steady, shoulders relaxed, hands unclenched. There was no anger on her face, no fear, no hesitation, and that absence unsettled everyone watching more than any outburst could have. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking for mercy. The judge nodded once, granting permission. Carolyn turned, not toward Dennis, not toward Vanessa, not toward Patricia, but toward the press and observers gathered at the back of the room, the people who would carry this story beyond these walls. She took one breath, then spoke. I was presented with divorce documents while recovering from surgery, she said evenly. My children were hours old. The words landed hard. A ripple moved through the gallery, pens pausing, fingers tightening around cameras. She continued, her voice calm, controlled, impossible to interrupt. My access to the home I lived in was revoked without a court order. My accounts were closed while I was still in hospital bed. My children's basic needs were turned into leverage. Dennis shifted in his seat. Vanessa's posture stiffened. Patricia's jaw tightened, though Carolyn didn't look at any of them. My silence, she said, was mistaken for consent. Cameras clicked rapidly now, flash after flash lighting the room, but Carolyn didn't flinch. She had lived through worse than bright lights. She paused, not for being overwhelmed, but because she chose to. When she spoke again, her voice dropped quieter. This isn't revenge. Dennis scoffed audibly under his breath. Carolyn heard it and turned to look at him directly for the first time. This is accountability, she said. The word echoed across the room. Vanessa's remaining composure slipped entirely, her throat moving as she swallowed hard, eyes fixed on her own hands. Carolyn shifted her gaze toward Patricia. For years, she said calmly, I was told to stay quiet, to be grateful, to endure. Patricia didn't blink. But endurance, Carolyn continued, is not agreement. The room had gone so quiet that every breath felt audible. She turned back toward the judge and the press. And for the record, she said, her tone still level, still restrained, the company that licensed the algorithm I built quietly over years finalized that deal the same day my children were born. Dennis's head snapped up. Carolyn didn't stop. Their internal valuation of that technology, she said, exceeds $1 billion. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A reporter whispered something to the person beside her. Another dropped the pen entirely. Vanessa's face drained of color. Dennis froze completely. Patricia stared straight ahead, unmoving, as though her body hadn't yet caught up to what her ears had just heard. Carolyn didn't elaborate further. She didn't name the company. She didn't need to. Her lawyer, the court, and the licensing firm's legal team had already confirmed everything off camera. These words weren't a boast. They were simply fact, now permanently on the public record. She stepped back slowly and returned to her seat beside Renata, her hands settling calmly in her lap. The room buzzed now, low voices and frantic typing and whispered disbelief filling every corner. Dennis stared at the table in front of him. Vanessa's phone buzzed once. She ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. She finally glanced down to spite herself. Messages stacking rapidly across the screen. We need to pause our collaboration. Given today's ruling, we have to distance ourselves. Call will not proceed. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Carol and didn't look at her. She didn't need to. The judge called for order, but the energy in the room had shifted permanently and completely. The story no longer belonged to Dennis, or Patricia, or Vanessa. It belonged to Carol and now. And as Vanessa's phone continued buzzing, urgent and unrelenting, one truth became impossible to ignore. What had started as a private betrayal was now a matter of public record, and the collapse had only just begun. The first notification hit Dennis's phone like a slap. Access revoked. He frowned, sitting in the back of a car, still wearing the same suit from court, his jaw tight, his mind replaying Carol Ann's words even as he tried to push them away. The company that licensed the algorithm I built. Internal valuation exceeds $1 billion. He hadn't slept the night before. He hadn't expected to lose, not really, not completely. Another notification blinked across the screen. Accounts under review. Then another. Mandatory meeting, compliance, and HR, 3 p.m. His chest tightened. This wasn't supposed to touch him. This was supposed to be messy for Carol and not for him. He was the one with status, contacts, influence. He was the one people respected, or so he'd told himself for years. He stepped out of the car and headed toward his office building, walking a little too fast, trying to look casual in a way that fooled no one. The lobby felt different, quieter. Eyes followed him briefly, then looked away just as quickly. He swiped his access card at the turnstile. Red light. He tried again. Red. Must be an error, he muttered under his breath. Security approached, 2 guards he knew by name, neither willing to meet his eyes today. Mr. Hutchins, one said carefully. They asked us to bring you straight to the executive floor. Dennis forced a smile. Of course, he said. They probably need help handling the press. Completely one-sided, by the way. I can explain. They rode the elevator in silence. On the top floor, he walked into the corner office that had always belonged to his mentor, the man who had effectively groomed Dennis for the role he now held. The executive sat behind the desk and didn't stand when Dennis entered. Good afternoon, Dennis said, forcing charm into his voice that didn't quite land. The executive slid a plain cardboard box across the desk without a word of greeting. Your access has been terminated, he said flatly. Effective immediately. Dennis blinked. Excuse me. Compliance reviewed the testimony and court documents. The man said. The financial abuse, the attempt to funnel funds as consulting payments, the emails using our company letterhead to promote Hutchins Coal Analytics. That's my private life, Dennis snapped. You can't. You attached our logo to it, the executive cut in. You represented yourself as acting with our backing while trying to profit from technology you had no rights to. That makes it our problem. On the wall outside, where Dennis's name had once been listed under future partners, there was now an empty space. His nameplate was already gone. He stared down at the box, personal items, framed photos, awards he'd once displayed proudly. Security will escort you out, the executive said. You're not to contact any clients. Legal will follow up regarding potential claims. Dennis laughed once, bitter and small. You're throwing me out over her, he demanded. Over a woman who spent her life doing nothing. The executive's expression hardened. You might want to read the business news before you describe her that way, he said. It seems the market disagrees. Dennis didn't answer. He picked up the box, his hands feeling heavier than the weight inside it. Security led him through an office he used to walk through like he owned every inch of it. Today, no one greeted him. No one met his eyes. Conversations died as he passed. In the reflection of the elevator doors, He didn't see a powerful man anymore. He saw someone who had bet everything on control and never bothered to read the fine print underneath it. Across town, Vanessa sat alone in her car, parked in a quiet lot, her hands shaking as she scrolled through headline after headline, lighting up her screen. Court confirms abuse, upholds prenup in Hutchins case. Consultant named in misuse of funds allegations. Shell company linked to attempted IP interference under review. She opened her banking app. Account temporarily restricted pending review. Her laugh came out sharp and brittle. This wasn't the plan, she whispered to no one. Vanessa had always been strategic. She didn't fall into affairs by accident. She leveraged them carefully. She didn't attach herself to men for romance. She attached herself for access. Dennis was supposed to be a step up, not an anchor dragging her down. Her phone buzzed again, messages from numbers she recognized immediately. Given today's ruling, we have to pause our work together. Our firm can't be associated with ongoing investigations. We wish you the best moving forward. She knew exactly what those words meant. They were finished with her. She dialed Dennis's number. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Anger rose hot and fast, and she started the engine and drove without a clear destination in mind. That night, the house looked different. Not physically, the same walls and furniture, but the energy inside it had changed completely. The arrogance was gone. The illusion was gone. Dennis stood in the bedroom, tied discarded on the floor, cardboard box resting on the bed, pulling drawers open with more force than necessary. You said this wouldn't touch me, he said, his voice rough. You said we could spin it. Vanessa stood near the dresser, suitcase open, clothes thrown in without care or folding. She didn't look at him. I said we could manage it if you kept her calm, Vanessa replied coolly. You dragged her into a legal war while she was in a hospital bed. That's not spin. That's evidence. Dennis slammed a drawer shut hard enough to rattle the frame. You pushed this, he growled. You told me to make a statement, to show her she had nothing without me. Vanessa turned slowly, her eyes cold, every trace of sympathy gone. I told you to win, she said. You chose cruelty. There's a difference. Dennis stared at her. You're leaving, he demanded. Now. She didn't flinch. I don't stay where there's no future, she said simply. She picked up the last item from the dresser, a watch he'd given her, bought with money now tied directly to court-ordered restitution, and slid it onto her wrist without ceremony. This place was never really yours, she added. You only thought it was. She closed the suitcase and pulled up the handle. Dennis took a step toward her. You don't walk away from me, he said. Not after everything. She stopped in the doorway and looked back one final time. Watch me, she said. Then she left, not crying, not apologizing, not loyal, simply gone. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing through the empty house. Dennis sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The quiet pressed in around him, heavier than any noise had ever been. No footsteps, no voices, no phone calls demanding his time. His phone vibrated once on the nightstand. He grabbed it. A news alert lit the screen. Carol and Hutchins secures full custody. Billion-dollar licensing deal confirms her IP dominance. Below it, another suggested article. How a quiet strategist outmaneuvered everyone inside the Hutchins prenup. Dennis stared at the words until they blurred together. For the first time, the truth fully landed. He hadn't lost Carol, and because she was nothing. He had lost everything because he never cared enough to see what she was quietly building right beside him, page by page, in silence. He dropped the phone onto the bed and buried his face in his hands. In another part of the city, Carol sat in a sunlit room, signing the last of the documents that would close doors he didn't even know existed. The knock came sharp and sudden. Carol flinched, not from fear, but from habit. For weeks, every unexpected sound had carried weight. Lawyers, documents, court dates, consequences. Now, finally, it was about something else entirely. She crossed the room. Sunlight poured through the tall window, warming the quiet space. The twins slept in their bassinets near the couch, wrapped snugly, their breathing slow and even, the room smelling faintly of clean linen and baby lotion. She opened the door. Renata Cole stood there, a slim folder tucked under her arm. "It's finished," Renata said simply. The words landed with the same quiet force as a shout. Carol stepped aside to let her in, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Renata placed the folder on the table and opened it carefully, as though even now the paper deserved respect. She turned the last page toward Carol and, "Final judgment," Renata said. "The time to appeal has passed. All orders stand. Custody, restitution, enforcement of the prenup. The court is finished with this. There's nothing left for him to challenge." Carol stared at the signature line, her name already printed neatly above it. All that remained was one final acknowledgement at the bottom. She picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. As she signed, the weight she'd carried for years loosened all at once, quietly, without drama. No rush of triumph. No tears, just release. Renata closed the folder. "It's over," she said. Carol nodded. Renata lingered a moment, then glanced toward the twins. "They'll never remember any of this," she said softly. Carol followed her gaze. "No," she replied, "but they'll grow up knowing exactly what I did with it." Renata smiled briefly, then gathered her things. "The rollout starts next quarter," she added. "They'll handle publicity on their end. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. Your ownership is secure with or without interviews." Carol's shoulders relaxed fully for what felt like the first time in months. "I don't need billboards," she said. "I just need stability." "You have it," Renata replied. "Call me for the fun contracts next time, not the survival ones." Carol walked her to the door, and when it closed, the silence returned, but this silence felt different. It didn't press in on her. It didn't accuse her of anything. It simply existed, calm and unbothered. Carol crossed the room and sat between the bassinets, resting her hands lightly on the edge of each one. The twins stirred, then settled again. She watched them for a long time, her mind drifting not backward to what she'd lost, but forward to what had been preserved. Her dignity, her work, her children's safety. No one could rewrite any of it now. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the day moved on without spectacle. Cars passing, trees shifting gently in the breeze, people hurrying through lives that had nothing to do with hers anymore. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel victory exactly either. She felt calm, and calm, she realized slowly, was the rarest kind of freedom she'd ever known. Carol leaned her forehead lightly against the glass and whispered, so softly that only the room could hear her. "We're free." Behind her, the twins slept on, undisturbed, unaware of everything it had taken to give them this quiet. Somewhere far away, the noise of Dennis's collapse continued without her, and she didn't need to watch it. She had already moved on, because the strongest ending isn't revenge. It's peace.